everyone, welcome back to Resourceful Humans. I'm your host, Corey Haber, and today I have with me Deb and Deborah, who also happen to be related, which is fun too. So we're going to be discussing anxiety in the workplace, especially how that's changed in our remote environment today or in this pandemic world. They are both experts in this area and have lots of different experiences, so they do have a diverse careers, but both just as experienced in the anxiety area. I'll let you two introduce yourselves. So Deb, why don't you go ahead first?
Great. Hi, everyone. Delighted to be here with you today. My name is Deb Grayson Regal, and I am a keynote speaker, a leadership coach, and also the author of Overcoming Overthinking, 36 Ways to Tame Anxiety for Work, School, and Life. And again, I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled to be here with you, Deborah.
Hi, Deb. So happy to be here too with you. I'm Deborah Orbach Grayson. We are related. We're sisters-in-law, and delighted to be here together to talk about such an important topic. But just to back up for a second, so I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I do a lot of work and have for many years in the workplace. And as an EAP, employee assistance provider, as a consultant, and as a trainer. And one of the things I talk about is stress and anxiety. I too am an author of Building Healthy Family Relationships. It's a workbook for parents and step-parents. So thank you, Corey.
You're welcome. Thank you. And I think this is going to be great and very helpful to especially HR professionals out there, because I think that anxiety is a high priority right now as to how to deal with it, because it is more prevalent. People are having a lot change in their lives. So let's kind of jump in. First, I want to know what makes you both so passionate about this topic, or what are some experiences you've seen in the past, that made you want to help people when it comes to anxiety in the workplace?
So for me, I have a clinical practice as well. And what was apparent to me is that there are changes in mental health delivery. Is going to be able to have time to come in and see a therapist during work hours or after work or before. So I like going into settings where people need assistance and support. And so I've had relationships with different programs and work sites, and it really seemed to benefit people to go where they are at, not to wait for a program or not to wait for the right time when the session is. And so just having that fluidity, if you will, to be able to meet people when they need it and where they need it. And the results have been great. Utilization has always been high, but it continues to change. And so we'll talk about that as we're in this remote world and what we've seen. But that's how I became interested, is that people said they can't come to sessions. They got to go to work, or it's too much travel time. And so that's sort of how I got into that area.
And I would say that I got into it both from a personal and professional perspective. So in my day job, as I mentioned, I'm a keynote speaker and a coach and a workshop facilitator. And most of my workshops are really around communication skills. So helping people make better presentations, give and receive feedback, navigate difficult conversations, all of which make people very anxious. So that's always been a part of my professional role. In my personal life, though, I am the mom of a daughter, my 19-year-old daughter, Sophie, who over the course of her teenage years was diagnosed with 4 anxiety disorders. So generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and trichotillomania, which is a compulsive hair pulling disorder. And as she was diagnosed and had treatment and therapy and medication, she became more and more committed to talking about it to reduce the stigma of mental illness. And she roped me into her mission. I'm very competitive with her. I only have 3 anxiety disorders. She has 4. But between the two of us, we decided that if we were two successful people, successful students, successful professional, happy and healthy in our lives, and could let people know that it was okay to talk about mental illness, mental health, mental wellness, that was some way in which we felt like we could have a positive impact on the world. So I come at it both professionally and personally.
I think that's very true for a lot of things as well. I mean, I have noticed, I grew up with epilepsy, and I mean, even anyone with any sort of disability, I've noticed in the past that people are more understanding, accepting, and educated if you just talk about it. But I felt like for the longest time, no one really discussed any mental illness or anxiety because it's not easy to see. You can't see it, which I think also sometimes makes it difficult. And I find this at a lot of the businesses. Employers sometimes don't understand the importance of it, or how much it can impact their employees, because if you can't see it, a lot of times people don't believe it's there. So my question, go ahead.
Oh, and I was just going to add to that, because it's been a while, and it's a great question, that also not only across settings, but just instead of waiting until it gets to the point at which it creates a huge stressor. As a teacher, former teacher, for me, I'm always interested in teaching skills and having the conversation or doing programs on a preventative level, because we all need this information. It's not just somebody who has a mental health crisis. It's how do you manage change? How do you manage difficulties just on a regular prevention basis, wellness.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up. Over the summer in particular, I've been doing a series of webinars for organizations related to self-help strategies for people who don't like asking for help, how to help your colleagues manage anxiety, how to reduce the stigma of anxiety in the workplace. And one of the analogies or metaphors, I always get those wrong, that I often talk about is about our pain threshold, right? So most of us are walking around with like a little pain in our shoulder and a knee that hurts, maybe, when it rains, something like that, but we don't actually seek help until we fall down a flight of stairs and break an ankle, right? There is a certain threshold of pain where we say, oh, I shouldn't have to live like this. And one of the invitations that I make to people, and Deborah, I'll be curious to know your sense around this as well, is to say, like, why do you feel like you would need to wait until you were in so much pain or so much dysfunction in one or more areas of your life before you reached out and got some kind of help or support, whether that's a friend, a colleague, or a licensed mental health professional like you?
Right. So the whole idea that we're supposed to be doing it all, right? In the 80s and 90s, and, the idea is juggling these balls. Well, we know that there's always one in the air, there's one on the ground, there's balls all over the place. And so the idea that somehow people need to acknowledge that before they fall down the steps is really hard. And I get that, and it takes time. It's another ball, maybe it feels like, but clearly it is important and critical in being able to even walk up and down the stairs without falling. I use so I like that a lot. I use the emergency kit that you always have in your car. So having those tools in your car, in that emergency kit, like a first aid kit, is important, because you never know when you might be in a rainstorm or a blizzard, or, you need things, you need tools. Or it gets to the place or time where you're in that blizzard and it's white out, you can't see. You got to make sure you have flares, a flashlight, something warm. It's the same thing about, like, what do I do when I feel overwhelmed so I don't fall down the steps?
Yeah. I keep thinking that you're leaving out snacks, Deborah. Like, you are talking about flares, you're talking about a blanket. I'm like, whoa, where's the Cheetos and Oreos?
No, we did say snacks. You said Cheetos and Oreos.
That's true.
Cheetos and Oreos.
I know, yours would be baby carrots, right? A nice healthy muesli, something like that. Maybe a little shelf-stable yogurt.
Well,
I
no,
want Cheetos and Oreos.
The nice thing about Cheetos and Oreos is that they can stay in there for a long time.
Yes, that's my point.
Sure.
That's my point. But muesli lasts too. No worries.
So yes, we want to have it filled with things so that we're already acknowledging and anticipating we're going to need them. We're going to need help in some way, shape, or form. I don't know how to do this. We were talking before the program started about even where do you get furniture. We all learn from one another. So the feeling of having to do it all is, I think, what prevents us from having that emergency kit and having the tools to acknowledge that things that we're in trouble or we need help before we fall down the steps. Yeah.
Can you give me a few examples of situations or changes you've seen recently that have been stressors or cause anxiety for employees?
Yeah, where would I even begin? Right, so I think about, so working from home.
Yeah.
Is its own thing regardless of what else is happening at home, right? So working from home, homeschooling kids, having kids at college, taking care of aging parents, dealing with people in your family or community who may be immunosuppressed, the economy, racial relations here in the US is causing a tremendous amount of anxiety in the workplace. I mean, the list is forever. Deborah, anything you would add to that?
Yes, I would add to, and then that's a great list. And it continues to change. I mean, so there are different phases. In March, it was shock and disbelief and worry. And now, you know, in the summer, it was different. Now we're in October. So for me, what I've seen just in the last week, which I noted in my webinar on Monday, because it was something I hadn't anticipated, but out of the 7 questions I had, 6 of them were related to the stress around navigating differences around how people adhere to COVID and family members and challenges and feeling disrespected, not listened to, or kids and friendships around that. So the stress was something that we don't talk about, but it's really, what do? You feel like you're on an island if you're the only one wearing a mask. Yeah. Or what do I do if my 10-year-old is already, you know, wanting to play with the neighbor and they don't wear a mask and they go in the house? And how do we navigate that? So that's been a big stressor that is currently happening in this fall school year.
And I want to just point out one other thing, which is that all of the stressors that we had before March have not gone away. Right? So it isn't all of a sudden like, oh, those are done, I'm handled, and now I just get to deal with, you know, the March and beyond stressors. All of the existing stressors are still there, and it's add new levels and new layers and have compounded it for many people who are now feeling depleted, whether what is depleted feels like their circle of friends, of people that they can actually reach out to and physically be with, whether it's their savings are depleted and they're now needing to make harder decisions about where they spend their money, whether, you know, their work has been depleted because they've been furloughed or laid off or have, you know, job instability. So it's compounding things.
Right, and I think it's also changed because of the duration. So that's the difference. I talk about the difference between stress and burnout in a lot of my programs, and the difference really has to do with the ongoing nature. So I will add, Deb, that I think that stressors have fluctuated, changed, new ones arise. Some stay, some don't. But the duration and intensity along the timeline has and is continuing to deplete people, as you say, and lead them toward burnout versus a stressor that's episodic, that just comes and fluctuates, or it might come around November, December related to the holidays, but it isn't as ongoing. And that's really concerning, right? So how can we build not just immediate reactions and coping mechanisms to what might be occurring in this month, but how can I build lifelong strategies so that I can manage whatever comes my way and let go of whatever I can't control. And that's,
you know, I want to jump off of that point because I was working with a team yesterday and we were talking about, I was doing a mini appreciative inquiry summit on creating normalcy in abnormal times. Right. And so really the goal of this facilitated conversation that we had was to remind people that while we've never been through this abnormal time, everybody has been through something that felt abnormal and tried to create normalcy from it. So whether it is a death, a divorce, a baby, a marriage, sending a kid off to college, any of those things all of a sudden are stressors, as Deborah, as you were talking about, they're stressors. They may be episodic, but we had learned how to create some normalcy from that, and that you can leverage what you have used in the past, the mindsets that you've used in the past, the behaviors that you've used in the past, the allies that you've leaned into in the past, and bring them forward to this very abnormal time.
I just want to touch.
Good point.
Oh, I want to touch real quick on what Deb mentioned about how the stressors we had before the pandemic have not disappeared, because what I've noticed lately is a lot of businesses, a lot of HR professionals right now, that is their focus, and I get it, and it should be. But I do think it's important to also remember we can't focus so much on COVID and then lose our mindset of what we used to focus on. They're all still there. Just like COVID's not going away like tomorrow. It needs to be something that we figure out how to manage going forward forever, I think. And I do think it's important to remember that your employees haven't lost the stressors that they previously dealt with, and they just had more stressors added, is essentially what I think some businesses are forgetting, and not just businesses, people in general.
Corey, I talk about in terms of layers, so versus adding and getting rid of. So it's just an additional layer that is there, and it's different for each person, right? So I talk to people who are doing really well during this time. So I don't want to assume that it's stressful for everybody.
That's true.
I talk to students who are thrilled that they're working from home, doing school from home, and they're doing really well. And then I talk to high school students who hate it because they miss their friends. The same is true for adults. So I don't want to make the assumption that it's stressful for everyone, but there is an additional layer. It's like having to grab your mask before you get out of the car, right? And that's one piece. And then the other piece that's different, to piggyback a little bit on our earlier comments, is that unlike with a death or difficulty with a loved one or a relationship, the difference is, even though this pandemic and this time affects us all differently, we're all experiencing it. And that universal experience of just that it's not an individual experience can be comforting. So it's not all bad. Everybody can relate to it. And that is a positive. That's something that HR directors can, understand in the context of, it's not one person. We're going through this together, and we need to acknowledge that everybody experiences it differently, and we're all experiencing it. So just a thought.
I really like the example of the layers. So let's go off of that. How would you both suggest to someone in HR or even a business owner, how would you suggest to them identifying which layers or stressors their employees might be dealing with? I mean, how do you figure out if one person is having more anxiety because of this pandemic and working from home, and if one person is thoroughly enjoying it and maybe that isn't a stressor for them? How do you identify what the layers of stressors are for each employee?
Yeah. So I'm a fan of asking, right? I'm a fan of not making assumptions. I'm a fan of asking. I'm a fan of leading with your own vulnerability as well. So in the workshop that I did on how we can reduce stress reduce stigma as managers and leaders, part of it is being willing to talk about what feels true for you, in terms of what is stressful for you, so that you are in it with them, but not make any assumptions that my experience is your experience. So asking them what feels, and two really simple questions are, what do you miss and what do you not miss, right? What's hard for you now and what is surprisingly easier for you now, and let people populate those answers any way that they want. and then just make yourself available as a resource in two ways. So one is literally as a resource, right? If you have something that you want to come talk to me about, I am making myself available to you. And in order to do that, I'll just make a little shout out to NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They say that if you're going to talk to somebody about your mental health, you want to find somebody who you trust and demonstrates emotional intelligence. So if you want people to reach out to you as a leader or manager, you need to be trustworthy and you need to have demonstrated emotional intelligence. So that is, on one hand, is that you can actually be the resource. The other is to be a bridge to the resource, and you can wear both hats, right? So you might decide, I'm actually not comfortable talking to somebody about their anxiety or their depression or whatever it may be. That's fine, as long as you are willing to be the bridge to help them get the resources that they need.
Great answer. I agree. And I would think about it and talk about it in terms of change. So change is a non-judgmental term. And as I talked about earlier, we're all going through changes. We're changing, and then it changes again, and then it changes again. And so just the statement of we're all experiencing a lot of changes, or there's been a lot of changes, it's not the strongest person it's that we're looking for. We don't need it to look like this or like this. What we're really looking for is, how are you managing change, or what would be useful for you to talk about, or to have a program on, or to have available to you to help manage change. Yeah. Because that's what this process is about. So I think that's really validating. I think it's just open-ended, accepting, and realistic, right? And people aren't going to have the answers right away, and then they might go, I don't know. But if you are a leader or in an organization that is truly wanting the answer and asking for buy-in, then you're going to get a lot of different answers, which is good. And you're going to have to figure out, well, those are good. I never thought about, wow, okay, what would it mean to have a therapist on site, or available by phone, or 15-minute increments, whatever. Range of services, because there's no one size fits all. So the whole old model of just having a program, we talked about this earlier, Corey, right? That sort of structured and really tight, and it's an hour, and then you come once or twice a year. That doesn't really address the ongoing nature of this time. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It can be something that's in the array of services offerings. But by asking the question, you're opening the door for ideas, and for then you as a leader or an organization to also be saying, yeah, I'd be willing to try that for 6 months. One of the things I'm doing now with an organization that works with clients around their client populations is we're trying 15-minute sort of pop-up, here's what we need, based on the number of people who have asked for a particular, and then following that work site or that work group gets to decide, do they want more of it? Do they want something different? But so you can even change up the frequency and the availability, but it really is about having supports, and as Deb said, resources on hand for this ever-changing nature of what people need, which is exciting.
I want to just speak to the importance of being resourceful as a leader and a manager, because so often the leaders that I'm coaching with feel like they have to solve it, right? That they have to solve it for their folks, or that they actually have to make them feel better, right? Or fix it for them. And I say, no, that's not your responsibility, right? Each of us has a responsibility to take care of ourselves. And one of the roles of a coach, of a leader, of a mentor, of a manager is to remind people that they are inherently resourceful themselves, right? That they have the capacity to reach out to resources, and that you are there to help facilitate it. But so far too often, I am hearing managers use language that is intending to be helpful and is actually negating people's experiences. So language like, put it in perspective, this too shall pass. You think we have it bad, think about so-and-so who has it worse. That comparative language, or what's often known as toxic positivity, is often because we want somebody to feel better and we're uncomfortable that somebody else we care about is uncomfortable. So we'd like to get them out of it. And so, as a manager, a leader, an HR professional, rather than go to this too shall pass or put it in perspective or other people have it worse, say, things like, and Deborah, you are brilliant at these phrases, so I'm going to come to you in a moment, to be able to say things like, I hear you. This is really hard for you. I get that. How can I most help you? Or I'm not quite sure what I can do to fix it, but I'm here for us to make a plan together, right? So it's not pushing them, it's pulling them in, and you don't have to feel it or own it, but you do have to be a resource partner.
Absolutely. I cannot agree more. And in any role, I say 80% of what I do is I serve as a resource. So I'm a connector. I connect people to different resources. And you better bet if I don't know my resources, I'm not going to be very effective, right? Because it's not about me. It's not about any one individual. It's about connecting people with resources, because that's what really is the key to managing change. So it's about, like, when a kid goes to college, if they're so connected parent, how is that going to help that young adult really be effective going forward? It's not. It's going to hold them back. So connecting, offering resources for that family when that young adult goes to college, then helps that young adult be able to see the value, and I'm sure they've learned it from their parents and people around them, of using resources, because that's how we all get different perspectives, different ways of seeing things, and that's what we need. So there's, even if you have a coach and it isn't the right coach, find another coach. If a therapist, find another therapist, EAP provider. So the idea that there are many, many different ways to look at problems, and not all one size is going to fit all. Yeah.
Speaking of resources, there's one thing that I did want to bring up with the two of you today. I think that, at least for myself personally, when I'm anxious or I have a situation where there's anxiety caused, work-related, not work-related, it is more helpful to me to have that immediate gratification of being able to speak with someone when I'm feeling that anxiety. And one thing that I feel like tends to happen, and this isn't everywhere, but some places, for an employee to have that release to speak with someone at work about what might be causing anxiety, you usually have to plan ahead, schedule a time, and there may not be a lot of time given to you. They may not want to speak at work physically. And what are your suggestions as far as resources that can be provided to give employees or people at any business the opportunity to have that immediate gratification? What if they're feeling anxious about work on 1 p.m. on a Saturday? Then what? Do they have to wait till Monday morning or whatever time someone can meet with them? I mean, what are solutions for that problem?
So as a work site, as I said earlier, an organization, a variety of resources available versus just one or two in a certain box, right? It has to be this, and it has to be on that day, in this way, only telephonic, only in person. We know that that's not going to work. So thinking creatively, thinking about, from people speaking up, saying this would be useful as a resource. So then making those resources available, having relationships as a work site with online therapy or, telephonic, 24-hour, making sure that those resources are available, because your experience, Corey, is so common. And that's what most people say. And then by the time it gets to Tuesday, when they're having a program or when they're back in the office, they've already figured it out or done different things. And so finding a variety of to meet the ever-changing needs, whether it be time of day, time of week, method or mode of how it's delivered, and having a variety of offerings is really, and then making sure that everybody you work with has that information. People are always like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, well, maybe we do. I haven't checked it out. You know, again,
I think that happened.
Right.
sometimes a lot of people don't know what's available, but sometimes it's not available and it needs to be tried or experimented with. That would be my answer.
Good answer.
What she said.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
All right. So last thing, you know, I really want to talk about, I know you both previously mentioned like moving from regular stress. So when does something move from regular stress? You want to go first, Deb?
Well, I will, go ahead, Deb, if you want
No,
to.
you go ahead.
I was going to say that the definition of stress really is what happens when demand exceeds capacity. So what is stress? Stress is a word that we use a lot, and it doesn't really, there isn't just one way to define it, except I like that definition. So it can be even when things are going well, right? So so that being said, I look at a couple different things. I look at intensity and duration. And so intensity, how intense is it? What does it feel like to you on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most, 1 being the least? And not just in that moment, but I'd say for a period of 3 days. So that's the intensity of it. And I really listen carefully to and look at those numbers and help each person try to be honest and just accept this is a 7 or this is a 9. Because if it's a 9 and it's been 9 for 3 days, again, out of a scale of 1 to 10, that's a big concern. I also look at eating and sleeping. How has it affected the rest of your life? Those are the 2 common areas that stress affects the most. And it, you know, if they're having significant difficulties in either one of those areas for more than a couple days, then I would say that is a stress that really, you know, all stress needs to be looked at, but that is ongoing in nature, in its duration, and the intensity is high. And although the individual or person may have tried several different strategies, if it's not going down at all, then we would look at what else do we need, and are there other strategies that may take you outside of the workplace because you need more than what we're providing right now. And there's nothing wrong with that. But so I look at what do your numbers look like, because really my goal is to get each person to be self-aware, to identify them for themselves where they are at and what is the danger zone. You know, if you look at colors, green, yellow, red, what's their red? Is it a 7? Because if it's a 7, then that's fine. If it's a 4 and that makes them feel like they're in the danger zone, that's okay too. But to identify for themselves, and then together recognizing that things aren't changing, and that's a concern. So that's where I would go, is frequency, intensity, and duration.
Okay, that's good.
And where I look is it interfering? And if so, how much, right?
Yeah.
And we know that stress also serves a very, very useful function, right? It reminds us about things that are important to us and things that we value and hold dear. It is a reminder to keep us out of danger. And when it starts to interfere with your thinking and doing, that's a place to take a look.
Right. And, you know, I also do want to make the point that patterns and routines play such an important role in being able to look at your stressors and get a good baseline and get a good sense. You know, if I'm, for instance, using chemicals to try to relieve some of the stress, that's really going to play with my emotions and some of the intensity and maybe even the duration. I might be hungover. So I'm talking about getting a clear picture over a period of time of what it looks like, and being willing to do that honestly which is not always easy, but it means being vulnerable. But really, it also is a very caring thing. Like, I care enough about myself. I want to know how I'm doing. And instead of just sort of avoiding it, trying to take action. So when we take action, we actually, that stress response changes. It brings some endorphins. It allows us to feel better. There's some movement, no matter what the action is, trying something different.
Yeah. Corey, I'd like to put in a plug for COVID-19, which is a very unusual thing to do. The one benefit that I have noticed from this is that we are now regularly talking about something that was unspeakable for many of us 8 months ago. It is now expected that people are experiencing anxiety, stress, overwhelmed, depression. And in fact, if you aren't, you almost feel like you need to justify why you're okay.
Right.
And I would invite anybody who is listening to this to seize the opportunity. There is a door that has been opened. Kick that door open, which is a very New York thing for me to say, of course, but really lean into that opening that has been created. Yeah, right. Push the door open, but we have an opportunity now that is making it normal, what was always normal, but now it has the perception of normalcy for people to talk about their stress. Leverage every moment of this opportunity so that something good can come from this.
I 100% agree.
I agree, and I think there's no question things needed a shake-up anyway. Not that we needed COVID, but this is an opportunity to talk about change, to figure out how you manage change or have difficulty managing change, and what you can try to make it different. Yes, absolutely.
And I know
so glad you said that.
We're almost out of time, but I really, really want to ask you this last thing. And I just kind of thought about it while we were talking here. If you could both give an example, at least one, of a situation that you've seen that was handled poorly at a workplace with an employee that was trying to handle anxiety, stress by management. But you don't have to mention any names or business names, just how it was handled in a poor way, because I feel like that would help people really know, have they done the same thing, and what could have been done better.
So go ahead.
No, several things come to my mind. And are you talking about recent or anytime?
Yeah, anytime is fine. If you have a good example during the pandemic, I think that would be very good to hear.
Yeah, there's, I've done stress workshops for a long time, but most recently, two things come to my mind. And one of them is doing a stress workshop, and it was around stress and relationships at work. And this was when we were meeting in person, so it was pre-COVID. And when I walked into the room for the presentation, none of the managers were there, only the employees who wanted to talk about their difficulties with the managers. So it was really apparent that there wasn't an understanding of how this was a inter-office, inter-organization dynamic that needed to be looked at. It was sort of the message of, you've got the problem and you're the only one who has to manage the problem. There's that. And then the other thing I will just say in COVID is one mistake which sort of was glaring to me was when people do sign up for a workshop to somehow take note of who's there and who's not, and listing names and building incentives for those people. It comes from a really good place. I think it sort of reinforces the idea that that you're going to get something tangible from attending something for your wellness, and that might be the only reason, versus to just do away with who signs up and do away with who canceling it if they're fewer than what they thought is the recommended number. Because I think even if there's one person, 5 people who need it, it's valuable. So just some little tweaks.
I find that that's true for a lot of things. I mean, even in just my experience, when I go to do a presentation on the employee benefits, the biggest frustration I have is when I show up and management is not there for that in-person presentation, because that sets, I think, the example that the employees need it, but the management doesn't. And it sets the example that it's not important to be educated. And whether you want it or you don't want it, but management should be present for everything.
Yes.
Especially, I mean, anything. When I go to present, they need to be there, and they need to show their employees that this is important to be educated on. And then at the end of the day, you make your decision of what you want. Same thing with what you were mentioning. I always tell employers, they say, what do you need from me? Your support. That's the only thing I need from you.
Right.
You don't want to make your employees feel singled out, and you don't want to make them feel degraded as if they might need something, but you don't need it. I mean,
Exactly.
we're all people. Someone might need it in management. Someone might not.
Exactly. Great.
And I would share two small things. So number one is, this is actually a chapter in the book Overcoming Overthinking, and it's called Meet Them Before You Move Them. And a big misstep that I see people make is the idea of, I want people to feel better. I want people to move on. I want people to decide that, working on a hybrid team is fine. And so they try to move people to where they want them to go before they've actually met them where they are. So before you can get anybody to consider another perspective, another action, a new habit, they need to feel like you have met them first. So what's going on for you? How are you feeling right now? What feels hard about this for you? Tell me more about what feels hard about this for you. And then demonstrating that you understand where they are and validate where they are before you ever try to point them in another direction, right? So number one, meet them before you move them. Number two, change and transition are not the same thing, but we conflate the two. And this comes from the work of William Bridges. A change is something that is tangible, right? So March 7th, I was working in an office. March 8th, I was not going into an office anymore. I might have my dates wrong. That's a change. A transition is the psychological process that people go through in the face of a change. And if you have more than one person working in your company, you should assume that people are not transitioning simultaneously. That you may have somebody who 7 months later is still mourning the fact that they don't have an office to go into, mourning their loss of privacy, independence, any of those things, where you have somebody else who's like, woohoo, this is what I've always wished it would be. And you cannot conflate a change with a transition.
I like that. That's true. Well, you guys were wonderful. The two of you are wonderful. And I think we could keep going, but we are out of time today. But I know you both are available on LinkedIn. If someone watching this has further questions, they want to message you directly, feel free. And I know they will give you their opinion or advice or help you out.